Jumping up from her seat, Aurora apologized to the Countess and, stuttering, muttered that she didn't know that the woman had already entered. Rosamund, surprisingly, did not go into a long tirade, sighing that it was a waste of time and ordering her to sit down. The future Duchess tried to contain all the raging irritation within herself and only sighed, thinking that at least the woman had not started a long monologue. The doors suddenly swung open, and a serious-looking Angela appeared on the threshold, carrying a tray with a teapot, cups, and snacks. The Countess sat down and muttered that today they would be studying etiquette, and the scenario for the lesson would be their first tea party. Looking at the maid who was placing cups on the table, Aurora thought that she could not concentrate in her presence, but she agreed. Looking back at the maid, who had already finished her work but was still standing, the Countess asked why she was still there. Nodding politely, Angela said that his lordship had asked her to stay in case my Lady Rosamund did not like the food. Looking at her calm expression, the pink-haired girl thought that she doubted that Ettica had given her such an order, and that she had something in mind. The woman turned away and suggested they begin, adding that they would first practice facing unpleasant and uncomfortable questions. Getting straight to the point, the Countess said mockingly that she could see that the notorious Duke was not indifferent to the bride. Rosamund said that after all, he had gone through a lot to bring his bride here despite her low status, asking if that was true. Thinking that it could hardly be called an awkward question, the pink-haired girl smiled and said that it was indeed true. The woman warned with a smile that she should be on her guard, because the hotter love burns, the faster and more tragically it fades. Angela remained silent, and the dark-haired one smirked when the young Baroness asked if they were hinting that the engagement might be broken off. The dark-haired girl said that there was no need to get so worked up over a simple question, and that it was nothing compared to what would happen in the future. When she added that the Baron's daughter did not seem to have been in high society, Aurora replied that she had lost her memory due to an accident. Laughing after these words, the Countess declared that it was very convenient to justify oneself with amnesia, as it allowed one to avoid bearing any responsibility. The girl lowered her head and looked at her without a smile, reacting to the question of whether the Duke knew about this with ordinary silence. When she forced out that they hadn't discussed it, Rosamund said it was very wrong to keep secrets from her betrothed. At the same time, the same betrothed Duke was sorting through papers in his office, asking if he had been given a full report. Wendell nervously shuffled through the papers and said that everything should really be there, and the blonde man said that he was expecting news about the bride. The man adjusted his glasses on the bridge of his nose and looked at his assistant, asking how Aurora's assigned lessons were going. The young man, who had not thought that his Grace would be interested in such a thing, hastened to nod and assure him that everything was indeed very good. He added with a smile that the lady was called a genius, and the teachers were very impressed with her, and the Duke muttered that this was not at all surprising. Geoffrey looked up with a displeased look in his dull gray eyes when he heard that his bride was not admired by all the teachers. Wendell said Lady Rosamund, who was in charge of culture, had not a single positive word to say about her student. Leaning back in his chair, Ettica asked again if this was true, and then suggested that he should find out everything from the woman. Just as he rose from his seat, a servant immediately informed his lordship that the Countess wished to visit the Duke, and he ordered her to be called. When the woman entered the office with a bow, the Duke appeared before her with a thoughtful look and said that now they had met in person. The dark-haired woman greeted his Grace, expressing gratitude to him for the fact that the man decided to accept such an unexpected visit. Ettica interrupted, saying that he didn't have much time, and therefore it was better to decide everything quickly, looking at the Countess and asking what she wanted. Rosamund said with a sigh that it pained her to talk about it, but she had come to tell the whole truth about Lady Aurora to her fiancé. Without smiling brightly, the fair-haired man said that he doubted that he could be surprised by any facts about his beloved. Trying to overcome her trembling, the woman mentally convinced herself that she should not be afraid, because the Duke himself would be in her debt. Pressing her hand to her chest, the woman confidently declared that this girl, his lordship's fiancée, did not come from a noble family at all. Through her channels, the woman learned that the Duke's bride was not an aristocrat from high society, but the daughter of a baron. The Countess, who preferred to grab the bull by the horns right away, concluded that such information would clearly play into her hands in her communication with the Duke. Initially, the woman was happy to take this position, but she could not imagine that her student would be the daughter of this damned Camilla. They had been rivals with this woman since their youth, and the Countess knew that her affairs were going badly, but she had no idea that she would send her daughter to the Duke. Clutching the paper in her hands, The dark-haired woman muttered out loud what it was that Jeffrey could like about this lady, and she had to see it for herself. That is why she agreed to take on the role of a teacher of palace etiquette and culture. But what was written on paper did not match reality. Looking at the girl, who had clearly never been in high society, the Countess became convinced that Audrey could not have a daughter like this girl. Rosamund said that this baron's daughter was in fact just a commoner, because their family had only one heiress named Julia. Believing in the success of her next words, the dark-haired woman added that they had decided to simply make a laughingstock of the Grand Duke Ettica. The two young men listened in silence as she said that she felt she had no right to hide such information, which was why she had come. Covering his dull gray eyes hidden behind the lenses of his glasses, the blond man muttered that it would be even better this way, but he didn't look surprised. When he asked whether the Countess had forgotten his origins, the woman froze in place and quietly asked what he was talking about. Jeffrey reminded her that he had risen through the ranks through battle and that he had become a duke, even though he had started out as a commoner. Folding his arms across his chest, the man shrugged, and then added that if the Countess had already forgotten about it, then it wasn't that important to her. The dark-haired girl stuttered and replied that of course she remembered everything, but insisted that the girl had tried to lie to him about her origin. The Duke wearily asked if she was deaf, and then added that he was not interested in the bride's origins, and he did not wish to repeat it. He added that, among other things, he was not getting married because of the political situation. Their engagement was based on love, asking if that was clear. Rosamund, in despair, thought that she could not allow everything to end this way, and again stubbornly tried to object. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and the woman turned around as his lordship was informed that the maid, Angela, wished to see the Duke. When the man ordered the girl to be let in, the Countess turned around and thought that it was the height of rudeness to receive a servant during a guest's visit. She saw the already familiar blue-haired maid, who no longer seemed as polite as she had been during tea drinking. Suddenly waving her hand towards the teacher, Angela asked that the woman be thrown out, and she, stuttering, asked what she had just said. The fair-haired man said indifferently that he did not know what Countess Rosamund expected, adding that it seemed that they no longer needed her here. Holding the book on how to mock people with a smile, Aurora thought about what the Countess would get when she learned everything for the next lesson. Immediately pressing her palm to her lips and reading the text more carefully, the girl began to think about whether she would be able to apply and practice what was written. The book taught how to encode a negative message into seemingly innocent remarks that are commonly exchanged in high society. Pressing her nose with her palm, the future Duchess muttered tiredly. Was she really going to have to distort her words so much? She threw her head back on the sofa and declared that it was very unprofitable to beat around the bush, and the blond man hovered over her, asking what was the matter. The pink-haired girl's eyes widened in surprise when she heard a man's voice and saw her long-suffering groom in front of her. Rising from her seat, Aurora looked up at Jeffrey and asked why he had come, and the Duke asked if there had to be a reason for his visit. Scratching her cheek with her finger, the girl shook her head and said that not at all, she was just thinking about it. Ettica nodded, indicating that he understood her excuses and words, then calmly stated that he had come to discuss something. He smiled at her expression and asked if she objected to the dismissal of the culture and etiquette teacher. The pink-haired girl asked a little nervously if something had happened, and the man replied that anonymous information had been received about the Countess. Jeffrey added that she seemed too stupid and also used foul language, and the Baroness asked whether Angela had been a witness. The Duke listened silently, but with interest, as his bride said softly that she meant that he did not need to try to maintain her anonymity. In fact, Aurora was very touched by this act, because she, Angela, although she could seem a little cold, had a kind heart. The man said he was surprised at how patient his bride was, even when it was completely unnecessary. Audrey nodded in surprise when Jeffrey said that if something like that happened again, she didn't have to hold back and endure it. The blond man said that the girl he fell in love with was not a submissive fool, asking where that fire had gone. Looking at his future Duchess very carefully and even intently, the man softly but confidently declared that he had chosen her. Leaning over the back of the sofa, he said that her reputation would soon merge with that of the Ettica family, and that this must be remembered. That evening, Aurora told her maid that she was grateful for such an act, although she could not believe it, and Angela declared that it was right. Raising her index finger, the pink-haired girl declared that she didn't want the girl to take such risks for her in the future. When the lady advised her not to do such things anymore, the dark-haired one let out a long moan and advised her to get a good night's sleep. Left alone after her question was ignored, The Baroness lay down on the large, soft bed and covered herself with a blanket. Jeffrey's words about how her reputation would soon become the reputation of the Ettica family, and that she had to remember that, kept playing in her head over and over again. The girl slapped her palms on the bed, closed her eyes, and ordered herself not to let the trash with the pretty face charm her. Sitting up on the large bed and trying to even out her breathing, Aurora blushed and thought that she should remember her wonderful reward. She heard some noise and wondered with surprise where these strange sounds were coming from, because before that it had been completely quiet. Realizing that it was coming from above, the pink-haired girl looked up and remembered that her fiancé's room was on the floor above. The girl decided to check what was going on and took a candlestick with burning candles with her and walked down the corridor, going out onto the stairs. Aurora stopped at the heavy doors and knocked, calling his lordship, but after that she remained in silence, receiving no answer. After asking again if he was there, she froze in place and thought that, in principle, she could have imagined it, because now she could hear absolutely nothing. Someone suddenly called the lady from behind, right next to her ear, and the pink-haired girl screamed in horror, and her body seemed to fall into her heels from a surge of adrenaline. Turning around, the future Duchess was breathing heavily and desperately said that he had frightened her, and Sir Campbell asked for forgiveness for this. She explained that there was a strange sound coming from inside, asking if it could be that his lordship was in trouble or something like that. Shaking his head, the man asked his mistress to return to her chambers, and when Aurora asked in surprise why, she heard that it was his lordship's order. Sir Campbell turned and declared that by the Duke's orders, no one was to enter his chambers at night, not even the bride. Eventually, Audrey was forced to return to her chambers without seeing the Duke, and in the morning, the butler announced that there would be no visit for the time being. Sir Campbell offered his lady a tour of the duchy, and she looked up from her biscuits, asking in surprise what he was talking about. The man shrugged and said it was a good opportunity to go shopping and see the sights of the area. Turning to him, the pink-haired girl thought about this proposal, because, in all honesty, she had practically never been anywhere. A little later, they had already carried out their plan, leaving for the settlement while the weather outside was amazing, warm, and sunny. Angela muttered that the streets were well decorated and noisy, while Aurora looked at everything with admiration and was delighted. Thinking about her long-time dream of traveling around Europe, the Baron's daughter said that it was her first time in such a place, and the maid suggested starting with food. Having listened to her instructions at least on this matter, the future Duchess bought them fried meat with vegetables, immediately admiring the food. Sir Campbell, who was actually acting as the mistress's bodyguard, could hardly keep up with the girls who were rushing to all places. Suddenly, stopping her discussions in rapid steps, the pink-haired girl froze, looking at the restaurant sign with interest. Aurora confidently stated that if there were holes in the establishment's building, then there would definitely be delicious food there, and the maid asked if that was true. She added that the exterior rivaled the tacky decor of the guild's restaurant, and Angela noted that the house was simply faded. The three of them all decided that there might be something much more interesting hidden behind such a dull facade, but silence awaited them in the hall. The pink-haired girl suggested that it might not even be a restaurant, and that it seemed to be closed, and her maid muttered that it looked like it. Shaking her head, the future Duchess noted that it was a great disappointment, and they should leave after the invasion. Suddenly, a woman who looked much more like an ancient Egyptian goddess greeted the guests and asked them to wait for tea. Aurora looked at her in surprise, because such silence did not seem to suggest the presence of people in the room. At the same time, the Duke, who was again working in his office, asked if the long-suffering Duats liked the new representative. According to Wendell, the man learned that these creatures once again did not like the man who was sent to them and simply beheaded him. The adjutant said that they did not seem ready for dialogue yet, and the Duke called them crazy bastards, asking if there was news from the Emperor. Sweating from nerves while talking to his boss, the young man shook his head in a negative way and noted that this was also not the case. The blonde man said that he probably spoiled him too much, and then noted that sometimes he wanted to open his skull to understand his thoughts. As Jeffrey rose from his seat with a thoughtful look, the assistant extended his hands and suggested sending another messenger. Ettica shook his head and said that he hated it when things dragged on, and therefore preferred to go there on his own. Meanwhile, Aurora told Nephthys that she had returned from the bakery and brought a limited edition of strawberry-flavored cakes. The dark-haired girl nodded, because she had brewed fresh tea just in time, and the guest noted that this drink always smelled very delicious. Nephthys was the owner of a restaurant called The Taste of Life, and the girl felt that she had become her first friend in the new world. The woman expressed the hope that her guest had not become involved in anything unpleasant on the streets due to racial conflicts, and she nodded. When the future Duchess asked if something had happened here recently, Nephthys replied that yes, it seemed to concern the people of Duat. Raising her cup of drink, Aurora admitted that she was hearing about this for the first time, specifying what these creatures might be. The dark-haired woman said that they live on the edge of the underworld, and an ordinary person cannot see its threshold, but the Duats cross it freely. The girl listened with surprise and interest to the fact that this people existed on the border between life and death, but she did not fully understand what was being discussed. Aurora, with a bit of fear, carefully asked if it looked like some kind of zombie, asking hopefully if they ate people. The woman replied that there is a symbiosis between them, no one kills people, and her interlocutor asked how they exist then. When Lady Nephthys' name was called, everyone present turned around, because they were surprised that someone else was there at that time. A man dressed in an interesting white robe said that the lady had a guest waiting, but she reminded him that she had asked not to let anyone in. The subordinate asked her for forgiveness and said that he could not refuse such a guest, and the dark-haired woman immediately rose from her seat, looking at him. She asked her guest for forgiveness for having to interrupt the conversation like this and asked her to continue it at their next meeting. When Nephthys added that they would see each other soon, Geoffrey suddenly appeared, declared that this would not happen, and asked what she had in mind. The woman rubbed her neck nervously and said that she wasn't planning anything bad, and Aurora asked if they knew each other. The blonde man said that he knew, as if he had said that the bride could communicate with whomever she wanted. But that did not mean that she had to mess around with other races. Responding to the girl's surprise, Geoffrey said that he couldn't blame her, because from Lady Duat's side, he looked very human. The pink-haired girl turned to him and asked if he wanted to say that Lady Nephthys was a representative of the Duat people, and he agreed. Seeing how quickly the girl's expression changed, the dark-haired girl asked her for forgiveness and said that she did not want to deceive anyone. Putting his arm around the girl's shoulders, Ettica asked her not to make him laugh and added that she knew his fiancé, and that was why she had approached her a little earlier. He added that if she had laid a finger on his bride, the Dachshunds would never again see the light of day in his domain or in other lands. Nephthys called the Duke's behavior nonsense and said that if he came to negotiate, then they should be conducted on good terms. Turning to the woman after hearing these words, Geoffrey asked if she still wanted to negotiate. Yellow Eyes didn't seem to be worried at all, despite her guest's menacing attitude, and said that only if he listened to her request. Both young men looked at her in surprise when the dark-haired one said with a smile that she wanted to see his fiancé as her representative. Putting an end to this agreement, she said that either they would communicate like this, or there would be nothing good between the peoples in the future. The pink-haired girl felt strange, because this conversation seemed terribly familiar, until the Duke stated that the woman was crossing all boundaries. Pressing the girl closer to himself, Geoffrey declared that this would not happen, and he would rather fight the Duats, without listening to other people's objections. Suddenly, unable to contain her irritation, Aurora forcefully hit her future husband on the back, loudly asking if he had really gone crazy. When the man finally remembered her ability to speak, Audrey asked him if he realized what he was doing. The girl said that it was not necessary to raise the topic of war at the first opportunity, and she would become a representative. But the groom called her. The blonde tried to appeal to reason, saying that this was a very difficult decision, which she might regret, not realizing the full danger. Nephthys said that the two of them seemed to need time to discuss everything, clarifying that she could wait and give them a couple of days to discuss. Once again, embracing his beloved's fragile shoulders with his strong arms, the Duke said that the woman should not even hope. Everything would not go according to her wishes. Rubbing her face with her fingers, the dark-haired girl purred that if she were a man, she wouldn't say such things with such confidence. Already at the palace, when Geoffrey asked if Aurora really thought she could deal with the Dachshunds, the girl asked why not. She said that she did not understand his anger, because if she could prevent the war, then she would be doing a good deed with her representation. The man asked if she was really going to work until she was exhausted, since she hadn't been sleeping much lately, but the pink-haired girl replied that she was fine. Declaring that she could calmly take care of her regimen and health, the girl suddenly froze and asked out loud for a minute, thinking about his words. Geoffrey listened silently to his bride's questions about how he knew she was sleeping little and clarifications about whether the man had been spying on her while she was sleeping. The Baron's daughter let out an offended breath and seemed to stop breathing in horror when she heard the evasive words about it not being an observation. Aurora ordered the sick pervert to move away from her, But Ettica explained that he had not entered her room at all, but had simply heard her tossing and turning in her sleep. Taking a few more steps back, the girl muttered that this was just a pathetic excuse, and not listening to him, asked him not to come closer. She listened with disbelief to the man's words about her room being located directly below him, and that he was the owner of exceptional hearing. Claiming that he could prove it, the blonde man asked her to go forward and look out the window, adding that he would stand still. Aurora looked out the window, and the Duke described exactly what she should see there: servants picking apples that had ripened earlier. When chaos suddenly broke out in the garden, and the maids began to run in different directions, the girl heard from the groom an exact description of this picture. Turning around, the pink-haired girl asked how he knew everything that was going on there, and Jeffrey approached her, explaining that he heard everything. He repeated that he had sensitive hearing, and therefore, even if he wanted to, he could not help but hear what was happening around him, and from there, he knew about everything. Scratching her cheek, the girl apologized and took back her words about the sick pervert, and the man said that everything was fine. Back on topic, Ettica stated that she could not become a representative of the duat unless she was desperate enough to become dinner. Aurora recoiled, quietly asking about dinner, and immediately imagined some unpleasant images, wondering if he wanted to talk about that. Audrey said she had only heard of symbiotic relationships between races, but the blonde added that they simply didn't want the prey to go extinct. Sighing, the Duke shook his head and said that it was only because people needed food that the duats were so friendly towards them, but she suddenly grabbed the groom and did not allow him to turn away from her, declaring that she still wanted to do this and asked to give her a chance to negotiate. The man asked if the bride could say that she would see this through to the end, and she muttered that she couldn't say that, but she was forced to. Immediately brushing aside her worries, the pink-haired girl raised her head and, with confidence in her voice, promised to take this assignment seriously. Aurora said that even if the Duke did not trust her, he should at least give her a chance, and offered to go and listen to the conditions together. Looking down at her carefully, Jeffrey sighed and agreed, immediately adding that from now on the girl had better not change her mind. Duke Ettica, the hero of the Empire, was supposed to die in the Fourth World War, according to the plot. This was the first passage from the novel that she read. A few days later, sitting in the carriage, she recalled that the scene after the Duke's death told of the fall of all humanity. Only now the situation was much more sensitive, because the girl knew that he died as a result of betrayal on the part of the duats. The negotiations predictably collapsed in the bloodbath that was not uncommon at the time, and there was no mention of his fiancée. Now Aurora was the new trump card, whose non-intervention would directly mean the tragic death of her fiancé, the Duke. In the event of his death, all of humanity would have perished in that conflict, and the man's widow would certainly not have been an exception to such events. Hugging herself with her arms, Audrey thought that this was why she had to move forward without thinking about the risks, and nodded to her own thoughts. Jeffrey watched silently as his bride's expression or posture changed, but was forced to announce that they had arrived. After a short greeting, Nephthys asked them to make themselves at home and said that they meant no harm and that all duats in general loved people. Aurora muttered that they loved them as food, but the dark-haired one objected that they only took a piece, and they did not die from it. Raising her head, the future Duchess raised her eyebrows in a little surprise and asked if they really eat people without killing them. The woman mentally blamed the Duke for this and said that the lady seemed to have simply heard a slightly incorrect explanation about their race. She said that they consume the deepest desire of man, in other words, the will to live and the desires of living beings. The young girl's expression of confusion was clear as she asked whether those unfortunates would die if their will to live were taken away. Nephthys confirmed that this was why they only took bites for their own survival, and the girl muttered that it was clearly not symbiosis. Her interlocutor closed her eyes and exhaled, saying that it was a matter of perception, and she didn't need to be so harsh since they hadn't eaten lately. The pink-haired girl asked why this was happening, and the duatka said that because of the greed of the rulers of the earth, more and more people were losing the desire to live. Looking away, the woman sighed even more miserably and said that this meant that their valuable food source was becoming increasingly scarce. When Nephthys asked what the future Duchess thought they needed to do to preserve everything, the girl hesitated uncertainly. Jeffrey silently stared at her, while the dark-haired woman said that people needed to be driven to despair, for example by starting a war among them. When it comes to this, she says, people suddenly develop a strong desire to live, because the closer they are to death's door, the more scared they are. Immediately raising her index finger, the woman added that this could only be a temporary solution and did not solve the main problem. A little tired of the endless chatter, Aurora leaned forward slightly and asked what the best solution would be in this case. Nephthys said that people should not be allowed to be exploited, and it would be best if the imperial family itself got involved in the work on this. She added that that's why they asked the idiot Jeffrey to talk to him, but he refused, and the man muttered that it was easier to get rid of them. When the bride turned to the man and gave him a displeased look for these words, the dark-haired woman added that he was very angry. Immediately smiling, Nephthys turned to the dear Duke and said that dealing with them would not be as easy as it might seem to him. The young men frowned and looked at the woman when she kindly asked if they had heard of the Anti-Human Alliance. Unwittingly, Audrey thought about reading about this group that eventually became the force that cornered the Duke. The fair-haired man said that he thought that she was thirsty for death, but this was not so, and the Duatka grinned, answering that she valued herself very much. After a short silence, Nephthys said that this was precisely why they wanted to negotiate with Lady Aurora instead of that old and stuffy Duke. When she added that the girl could decide for herself whether to go to the capital or talk to the lords, the pink-haired girl recoiled in surprise. Trying to appear nice, the woman said that the lady could do anything, and she believed in her. But the future Duchess mentally cursed her. To sum it all up, Nephthys stated that if they couldn't find a solution, the only option left would be war. Aurora frowned and pursed her lips tightly when her interlocutor expressed confidence that the young lady would not refuse this assistance. In the evening, Jeffrey came to his wife and asked how much she had drunk, but she did not answer and stroked her head with her hand, drawing attention to him. Holding a full glass, the girl asked into nowhere how to stop mass exploitation and whether it was possible to do so at all. Walking towards her, the man said that she could resign, but Audrey flared up and said that if she did so, a war would start. The blonde frowned as he watched his fiancée drunkenly mutter about how he really thought she would let that happen. Deciding to divert her attention a little, the Duke sat down opposite his future wife and gently asked if she liked this Nephthys. When the pink-haired girl slowly clarified what that meant, Jeffrey said that she was probably afraid that her new friend might die. Hardly remaining in her right mind after such a dinner, the girl turned slightly pink from intoxication and asked what he wanted to say by this. Aurora raised her head and said that she was afraid that her fiancé might go to war and die, so she was racking her brains over it. Ettica considered what he had heard and slowly asked her if she was afraid that he might die, and she slammed her hand on the table in agreement. The fair-haired man said in confusion that he had never heard anything more absurd, because he was not so weak as to need someone's care. Audrey rubbed her reddened face with her palms and immediately mumbled that she couldn't allow this war and she couldn't allow him to die. When the man calmly replied that he understood, the pink-haired girl raised her drunken gaze and asked what he meant by those words. Leaning forward, Jeffrey calmly said that he would cooperate in these negotiations, and the girl asked if this was true. Ettica said they should ask for an extension to work out a final plan, and the engagement party could be used as an excuse. Aurora immediately jumped up from her seat, hit the table, and shouted that this was a great idea, and she would tell Nephthys, and the groom emphasized that it would be better to do it by letter. The girl smiled at the fact that they would be able to prevent the end of humanity, and then raised her index finger, saying that it was true. Pushing her chair away from the table, the pink-haired girl said that it was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders, that she could finally sleep peacefully. But suddenly, she began to stagger. Jeffrey quickly stood up from his seat and grabbed his bride by the waist, preventing her from falling to the floor, and then said that she should be more careful. Looking at Audrey, who clearly couldn't get to the bed without incident, the blonde asked her to hold on to him so she wouldn't fall. Aurora obeyed, but suddenly blushed brightly, standing in his arms, and this blush could hardly be attributed to the consequences of intoxication. A little later, the girl was already spending all her time preparing for the engagement party, which seemed to last forever. She had to try on a dress specially ordered for the engagement, come up with vows for the groom, and choose an interior design for the event. 24 hours a day was clearly not enough, because in addition to all of the above, managing the restaurant fell on her shoulders. Besides, she had lessons all day long and had to find a solution for the duets, and she was silent at dinner. Aurora was distracted from her thoughts and very diligent chewing of food when Jeffrey suddenly stepped towards her and called her name. She asked if he needed anything, and the man explained that he simply wanted to ask why the lights were on in the dining room at that hour. When asked why the bride was snacking so late, the girl said that she simply hadn't had time to have dinner. Holding onto the back of a nearby chair, Ettica asked if she was that busy, and the pink-haired girl replied that she had a lot to do. The Duke said that if it was a party, she didn't need to handle every little detail herself, she could just delegate the work to the servants.